How you doing, YouTube? This is AUAG Prepper coming at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be talking about basically I Feel It Still. We're also going to be talking a little bit about the economy, and also we're going to be talking about cycles and how we have a recession every 7 to 8 years. We're also going to be talking about a few other things with pertaining to basically subliminal messages, and we're going to be going over that right now, which basically some subliminal messages that the powers that be use. They sometimes use multiple meanings within one subliminal message, if that makes sense. But when they use multiple meanings, when they use multiple meanings, those multiple meanings can mean the same, if that makes sense. So, for example, in iPad Go, right here, we had the C7 here, which is basically I gave my input on the subliminal message with the Corvette company. You know, you have these powers, you have these individuals who are in high positions, either CEO at a company or own the company itself. And a lot of these individuals made their success through these powers that be, or through these secret organizations, like the Skull and Bones, or Bone and Skulls, I believe I'm saying it right. Through Illuminati, or whatever the case may be. And they have to give their homage to the secret organization by giving subliminal messages as well, and they have to partake in all this as well. And with the C8, C7 company, or the Corvette company, C7 meaning 7 meaning completion, and going into C8 from 2019 going to 2020, C8 meaning new beginnings. If something happens this year, that would make perfect sense, because you have the completion of one system, the dying of one system, and then going into new beginnings of a new system. So the C7 and C8 was just a reference to that. Also, there was an individual who stated that the C7 could also be mean a technical term with technology, with computers. C7 meaning a form of deletion or reboot, which also makes sense, because if the system crashes and we go into a new system, it's a reboot. So you can see how there's meanings, different meanings for one subliminal message, but they all being the same. And then you have another individual who also talked about the C7, and I'll go ahead and point them out to you. See if I can find them. It's on the video iPad Go 2, Friday the 13th, full moon. And let me go ahead and show you. So this individual here, he has great information. So if you can, go back to the old videos and read up on his info. So let me see if I can find it. Give me 1 second. Okay, right here. So basically his input as well, which matched up with me and other individuals, was basically, hey, Hades, if I'm saying right, the LC and iPad Go 2, which is basically the C7, is it's 12.3 or 33, which is Strong's 12 meaning Abyss, meaning Hades, and then Strong's 3 meaning Abaddon. LC equals 33, which is 1 goes dark, else leaving the sea. It's Strong's for 33 and 3. Also, he states right here, he goes, upside down is C7, which is Hebrew, which is paleo, if I'm saying it right, symbol for KA, meaning end. So basically, the information that he's giving is very, very similar to, and also matches what I'm stating and the other individuals stating about what the C7, being reboot, or being the completion of 7 going to 8, or being the end. So it basically all adds up. So the powers that be use that a lot. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because the individual brought up a good viewpoint, another viewpoint of a subliminal message, which is basically the with the fish that basically aims towards, or migrates towards, the Antichrist for refuge due to the catastrophes that are happening on the planet. And you can see here, he comes out, the Antichrist comes out here, and you see the fish basically aim towards his boat, and they jump on his boat. Now, interesting enough is that another fish that have these type of stripes, which is a grayish white black stripes, is basically the sheepfish. And it makes perfect sense because of the fish that are aiming towards the Antichrist, becomes his sheep or his goats, as you could say. And obviously, the Antichrist is the false Messiah, but people will follow him. But also, another individual here made a good point, a very good point, and he stated, I thought they were called tsunami fish. So what I did was I basically looked up the fish, tsunami fish, and they have the same similar stripes and color as the sheepfish. And you can go back here, and the reason for this matching up is that if there's a attack on New York City, and I stated this before, that it could be a possible tsunami attack. And if that is the case, these are also known to be tsunami fish. You see that? You see how there's the subliminal messages for the stripes of fish like this, which could add up to either sheepfish or tsunami fish or both, all add up to one message. Does that make sense? So, the powers that be use that. They use one message to have multiple meanings, but they all tie together, if that makes sense. So, okay. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to talk about Portugal the Man, and we're going to go ahead and talk about their certain generations and how the subliminal messages of the song all add up to it. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Oh, before I start the video, let me bring you back here. Let's see if I can find it. Well, let's talk about the generations first, just to knock this out of the way. Generation X was a generation that came right after the baby boomers. They normally started between early to mid 1960s. Now, this is important here because in the song "I Feel Still," he calls out these generations. These generations is basically a worldwide thing. It's not just one particular country. In America, the generations that happened in America had the best prosperity than any other generation in the world. The second being, of course, Europe and so forth. But America is basically economic powerhouse ever since after World War II, and especially after the Cold War, with the Soviet Union collapsing and we taking full control. We led the world into massive prosperity, and other generations from different countries also prospered from this economic or currency, which backed by nothing system. Now, this is all important because the individual does call these generations out, and there's a reason for that. It's an economic reason for that. And let me go ahead and show you. The next one is the next generation that happened after Generation X was Generation Y. And the millennials started between early to mid 1980s, going into 2000 to early 2000, right around there, 2001, 2002. And then we had basically Generation Z, which is also known as the last generation, also known as Generation Omega, based off of what Google states. And if, again, having Z as the last letter of the alphabet for the last, or symbolizing the last generation, makes perfect sense, because if we go through major catastrophe and lead into tribulation, then Generation Z will be the last generation before Jesus comes back. So it makes perfect sense. Another thing is that when another generation kicks off based off of the amount of children that are being born. If the majority of the children are born in the particular age group of that generation, like between 18 to 25, then that generation kicks off the new generation, because the majority of that generation gave birth to the new generation, if that makes sense. So it's based off of birth rates. It's also based off of a few other things, but primarily birth rates. A generation usually ends between 70 to 80 years. The start of a generation ending is 70, and then the completion of the ending of a generation is 80. And we're coming up on, we're already entered the 70th year mark. I think we're on the 71st year mark of the baby boomers basically ending. So they're in the process of basically ending. The reason why I'm telling you all this, because this all will basically tie together. Let me see if I can find the... Okay, well, no, that's the Economics Magazine cover. Where's the... Hold on, give me 1 second. You know what? I probably didn't have it up. Let me type it in real quick. Hold on. Okay, so this is the Dow Jones here. And we're going to talk a little bit about this. Usually we have, every 7 to 8 years, we normally have a crash or a recession. And I keep saying crash. Let me go ahead and recorrect that. A crash is basically a crash like similar to the Great Depression or Weimar Germany. We never had a crash ever since after the Roaring Twenties, but we did have recessions. So there's a big difference between a massive market crash to an actual recession. So basically, every 7 to 8 years we have market recessions. And going back all the way after World War II, we can go back just to make it quick. In 1979 to 80, we had the silver and the gold market crash, or recession, as you can say. No, that was an outright crash. They went up very high. Silver went up to 50, and then it crashed all the way back down to $1 or $2. That's an outright crash. The next recession that took place, or the next downfall in the markets, was basically in 1987 to going to 1988, and we had a massive downturn during that time period, which is basically right here. You can see it here, and that was exactly between 7 and almost 8 years. Also, if you add another 7 to 8 years, we land on the next recession, which is basically the bond market crash. Now, not so much, stocks did go down, but mostly the bond market, being the 30-year and the 10-year note, had a massive devaluation, and that was exactly between 7 and almost 8 years of the last recession. Add another 7 going into 8 years, we had another recession, which was the dot-com bubble, which is right here. And you see it here. It started right around this area. Let me bring it close. You see that? Also, going another 7 years, we land on the housing market bubble. That's basically 2001 going to 2008. And we had a massive devaluation of our homes and our markets in general. And that's basically what started the market downturn, which basically was the home crashing, and also banks giving out a lot of loans to basically people who couldn't afford it, basically. Also, if you add another 7 to 8 years, we land between the year of 2015 going into 2016, and we should have had a crash. Now, based off of the cycles, we definitely should have had a recession start. And we had some downturns happening going in 2015 and 2016. If you add up the years, that equals exactly 7 to 8 years, adding up to the cycles. The cycles haven't broken since after World War II. They literally haven't broken every 7 to 8 years. It's been on point. The only time the cycle actually broke was basically going into late 2016, going to 2017, basically when Donald Trump was elected, and it caused people to ease their worries and to buy back into basically the markets. So it's basically shenanigans going on with the powers that be, keeping this basically going. And the cycles were actually broken ever up to this basically point. And there's a reason for this, because they stalled the great crash that was supposed to happen. They basically stalled it, and we were supposed to have it. But there was a reason why the powers that be postponed the crash, and they allowed to have extra 2 to 3 years tagged on to this market. I believe that this year is going to be the massive crash, and that's based off a lot of subliminal messages. Now let's go ahead and go to Feel It Still, because basically everything that I'm talking about with generations and also the cycles all tied in together. All right. And next video we're going to be talking about this, and we're also be talking about the silver market and the 2.5 speed. And 2.5 speed so far is adding up perfectly. We'll go ahead and talk about that in the next video. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Another thing is that this video and also Green Day point out to the average Joe, and this is average Joe worldwide. And specifically the American population, because the American population is the one that benefited the most out of this prosperity. This also points out to the American population, and generally in the average Joe, generally worldwide, but mostly the American population. And another thing is that we know that the egghead and iPad goat. Let me go ahead and bring this back. See if I can find it. Where's he at? We know that the egghead in iPad Go is basically the average Joe. Now, the egghead in iPad Goat, he's basically believing the TV of what the TV tells him. and it's a form of distraction of basically what's truly going on in the world. And you see that the egghead is basically drunk on the prosperity of what's going on with the old system that we're currently under now. And he's drunk also on the currency system because the purchasing of the currency is the one that's able to get him to be able to buy his drugs, his liquor, or to buy his good times. It doesn't have to be, drugs and liquor, but when you're hyped on something that is actually false, it's a form of drunkenness, if that makes sense. All right, so let's go ahead and go back. And that also, the egghead also ties in with this song subliminally as well. Now we have an individual here who is also known as the Average Joe in this song, and you can see that we know which country that they're talking about because it shows the American flag on this truck. It also shows, I believe, the American flag on several other videos, so they hit home, letting you know that this is America that they're talking about. And one more thing, there's a reason why they're pointing out America, because America is the one that is leading the world in prosperity, so they have to. And the old system is founded upon on the backs of the U.S. dollar. So if that makes sense. So we know he's drunk, and he's drunk on the currency system. And the reason why we know that is because of this. See how he's dancing? He's dancing in the drunken state, and then there's currency on the floor to let you know that he's drunk on the system that we're currently under. He was feeling it since 1966, and that's the year between Generation Baby Boomers and Generation X. It might be over now, but I feel it still. So basically it's continuing. And this song was released, and it's very, very interesting how they release these song dates right at the pinpoint time of certain cycles based off of the subliminal message. It's not a coincidence. Basically, long story short, this song was released on 2017 of March, 1st of March. And the uproaring of the markets, which basically postponed or stopping of the cycle of the 7 to 8 year mark of a recession, was stopped right at the end, or the few months before 2017. And then like 3 months into 2017, you had that song come out, which is basically Feel It Still. Let's go ahead and go back. Let me kick it like it's 1986. That's basically the year between Generation X and Baby Boomers, or Generation X and Millennials. This is 1966. You may have had your fill, but we feel it still. So the economy is basically continuing it on. 1986, calling out the generations again. It might be over now, but I feel it still. Now another thing is these individuals here are basically men in black. And our government basically are these entities, or these individuals representing basically the government. And what's interesting is that they're watching this individual from a distance on these motorcycles, almost like looking like gangsters. And the bankers, I don't know if you know, they have a unique terminology that people give them. They're called banksters. Also, the government is also a form of I guess say gangsters as well, because they deal in a lot of corruption. Our government does, and also the banks also deal in a lot of corruption. They do a lot of fractional reserve banking, lending out money, money that is basically from the savers going into loaners, which is basically should be completely illegal. They do a lot of stuff that is basically gangster-like. And these men in black are basically a symbolization of the government. And we also are going to go into that as well a little bit more. But also, I missed out one thing, and let me go ahead and go back. This is what I missed out. The powers that be want to make a one world government, a one world order, and a one world monetary system, and a one world religion. So basically, this globe here is a representation of obviously the planet, but you have an individual here who's stated as king, and you can see that he's pointing his heart toward his hand towards his heart. And like I talked about the last video, and even the unique hand gestures here, and you can see the hand, at the heart. You see it. Pointing to the last video, the Catholic Church, the imaging of Jesus, when he points to his heart a lot, and you can see that here, and the heart is a fiery red, and we're going to talk about that as well with Green Day, and just one more time just to show you. See that? We're going to talk about that as well as Green Day, because all these songs add up when it comes to subliminal messages and also painting a story for us. They all add up almost the same, basically. And long story short, when the Antichrist comes, he's going to try to pretend to be a false Messiah or a false Jesus, if that makes sense. This Jesus of the Catholic Church is not the true Jesus. Jesus is basically sitting on high right now as we speak in his glorified form. And the Bible teaches us, what Jesus looks like. And based off of the descriptions from John the Apostle and also Daniel, Daniel the prophet as well. So, we're going to go over that, and we're going to talk in detail on the next video, because it's going to be way too long if I talk about details now. But this is just to give you an idea that also one more thing, Daniel stated that the people who destroyed the second temple, which is Herod's temple, which were the Romans back in the 70 AC, basically are the same people that the prince is going to come from. And the people that destroyed the second temple was basically the Romans. And the prince, and he gave a lowercase p, because if it was a capital P away from a period, we know that that's the Messiah. We know that that's Jesus. We know that's God. But he gave a lowercase p to let us know that that's the Antichrist. So Constantine, back a few hundred years after Jesus, which I believe 300 years after Jesus, created the Roman Catholic Church. The Roman Catholic Church is a remnant of Rome. And the Roman Catholic Church took upon the Bible and twisted it in their own way, or their own viewpoint. That's why you had the Roman Catholic Church, praying to Mother Mary, saying that she's, the mother of heaven, which is completely false. And the reason why they say it is because God impregnated her to birth Jesus. But he didn't do it in a sexual way. He did it in a holy way. But you have the Catholic Church twisting things, and there's many reasons for that. Now we're going to touch on that next time, because the video is getting a little bit too long. But we'll touch on that next time. I just had to point that out because you have an individual here who is going to be the form, or who symbolizes the Antichrist. And he's going to have a Roman blood in him. And he's going to try to portray Jesus, if that makes sense. Just like the Roman Catholic Church tries to portray this image of Jesus, you see, which is a false Jesus. We know, based off of scriptures, who Jesus is and what he looks like. He's not in his fleshly form anymore, if that makes sense. All right, so let me go ahead and go back. And we're gonna touch on that more later on, so just you can have a better idea of what I'm talking about. Okay, I'm just going to speed it up. So we left off back here. Also, he talks about his heart eclipsing. Now let me turn this down a little bit. We had a solar eclipse that took place on July 2nd. We also had a solar eclipse that took place on August 27th, I believe it was, or August 23rd, and that happened in 2017. It was called the Great American Solar Eclipse. We also had a solar eclipse on July 2nd, which was 2019. It was two solar eclipses back to back, pointing at our country. The reason why is because, and let me type it in just so you could get an idea of what I'm talking about. Okay. So the solar eclipse that took place on July 2nd happened on the true date of our independence. And our independence was not on July 4th. It was actually on July 2nd. And the only reason why we celebrate on July 4th is because the mailing system or the messaging system back then was very, very slow. So we celebrated the victory much, well over 24 hours after the war has ended. Also, the solar eclipse that landed on America, which was the Great American Solar Eclipse that happened on 2017, the same exact year that song came out, basically divided our country in half by 50-50. And I'll go ahead and show that now. This solar eclipse was so precise that if you do the calculations, you would get exactly 50-50, or very, very, very close to 50-50% of our landscape. It also touched only the United States. Also, the solar eclipse in July of 2019, second, landed on our Independence Day. So basically, God blessed us, our nation, basically through giving us freedom from the British. If God is the one that gave us freedom, can't He be the one that give us back into bondage due to our sin, just like He did with His people back in the Old Testament with the Jews? Yes, He can. And he did it many times before in history when His people basically was going against them, or not acting right, and also having a sinful nature and not repenting of that sin. So basically, America started off as a Christian nation. I don't care what anyone tells me. This nation was founded upon by Christian values, and we have fallen very, very short from the grace of God. And because of that, God will punish us because of this. And the powers that be are going to use this punishment in their wicked ways, basically, as we foresee it now, that they're going to use it to basically start their new satanic system, which is going to be the mark of the beast and so forth. So let's go ahead and go back, and we will finish up this song, and we should be done in the next 2-3 minutes. Now, another interesting thing here, and he states it here. Let me go and bring it back. So he says, given to that easy living, and it's almost like he's painting a story of a time period. Given to that easy living, you had all three generations give into this easy good times. Now, we didn't have a large percentage of a generation to actually have fight back on this false prosperity, because it's false prosperity when you don't have a backing of true wealth, which is God's money. And God talks about in the Bible, in Deuteronomy, I believe it is, and I have to go research that as well. God tells us that when we go to the marketplace, that we're supposed to use gold and silver as a true form of payment. But also even in our Constitution, this is what I was telling you before, that we were founded upon by Christian values. In our Constitution, we state that nothing to be used in a form of payment but gold and silver. And this is in our Constitution. So a lot of the scriptures in the Bible were pulled out to be used to create our Constitution. So let's go ahead and play this again, okay? And it says, goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Now, when he says, going back to given to my easy living, the Nixon took us off the gold standard in 1971, and the biggest prosperity that we ever had on this market started in late 1990s, going to year 2000, and the three generations prospered greatly because of this. So let's go ahead and go back. So you're getting an idea of it. And he says, goodbye to my hopes and dreams. Basically, given to that easy living. When the crash comes, goodbye to my hopes and dreams, because it all goes. And he says this afterwards: start flipping for my enemies. Now, what he means by this is that the enemy is going to try to use the average Joe once the crash comes and the average Joe gets desperate. He's going to use the average Joe when they start establishing their mark of the beast, which is basically 3.5 years into the crash, which is mid-trib. They're going to try to use, let me see if I could find it. I have it up here, right here. They're going to use the average Joe to basically weed out or to snitch on fellow believers. Because it's going to come a point in time when the whole world's going to be hating the true Christ, hating Jesus. And the reason why is that the Antichrist is going to try to guide people towards him and guide people towards this new satanic system through the mark of the beast. And he's going to try to declare himself to be God. So he's going to try to take the focus away from Jesus and put it on himself. If that makes sense. So you can read here. It goes, "For it will be," and this is Matthew 10:20. It goes, "For it will be, it will not be you speaking, but the Spirit of your Father speaking through you." And that's basically when you get taken up to these councils or taken up to be judged. Jesus will speak for you against these wicked men. And he goes, "Brother will betray brother to death, and father to, his child, and children will rise against their parents and have them put to death. You will be hated by everyone on account of my name." And that's Jesus talking. That's the Messiah. And he goes, "But the one who preserves to the end will be saved." And Jesus is a part of basically the Holy Spirit and the Father. All three make Yahweh, if that makes sense. They're a Trinity, which is one God, and they have all one mindset. So that's to give you an idea of basically what's going to happen after this crash happens. People are going to get desperate, and they're going to start to snitch on individuals because of what the government is trying to do. And you can hear what he says and feel it still. And just like when someone is flipping homes, when you're going out to buy a home to flip it, you're basically a part of that the home economic system by buying it and flipping it for a profit because it gives you satisfaction. And that's why he says flipping for my enemies, because he's going to be helping them when this catastrophe happens. And he's the image of the average Joe, also the image of the egghead. And the reason for that is because it's going to touch home at the very end of this video, and you're going to be like, "Oh yes, I see it." So let's go ahead and show you, and we'll bring it back. Start flipping for my enemies. You see that? And we wait until the walls come down, meaning the old system. So he painted a picture almost like 1, 2, 3, 4 go in sequence. He painted the story just in sequence, given to that easy living, which is good times right now. Goodbye to my hopes and dreams, which is bad times, and then start flipping for my enemies, which is a severe bad time, basically helping the enemy to basically call out Christians, and also to call out not just Christians but also gold and silver stackers, because the government's going to want to know who has gold and silver. So it's both. It's going to be a combination of both, and people are going to call out, to the neighbors, tell the government, "Oh, he has this, he has that," either to the IRS or whatever the case may be. There's going to be a lot of snitching basically going on. You see, the government is watching them from a distance, and the government flips them off. Start flipping for my enemy, and the government flips him off because he hates the average Joe. So it's comical if you really think about it. It's very comical. All right. The government is not our friend. They're our enemies, and that's what the average Joe doesn't understand. That's what makes it a little funny.